I have not been to the southern coast of Turkey. It's been my privilege to travel all through Turkey. I've not been to Tarsus. That's a place I must go to at some point. It's kind of far away. I've been into the central parts of Turkey, to Istanbul, Ankara, the capital, to the west coast, especially where the seven churches are. I've taken several groups there. But what I'd like to do is, if I could, is do the travel that Paul did from Cyprus. And I'm in verse 13 of Acts chapter 13, okay? And Paul and his companions, that would be Barnabas and John Mark, his cousin, set sail from Paphos, look at the western city of the island of Cyprus, and came to Perga in Pamphylia. Now, please make note of what just Luke described in one verse. Wow, that's high seas, okay? If you've ever traveled, this is good grief. He's acting like they have a jet or a supersonic or a helicopter. Obviously, it's the sailing season. On the high seas in the Mediterranean, it's got to be between March and September. Okay, let's make sure you understand there's no sailing on these seas after October to February on the high seas, because especially in this area right here, the wind that comes off, you see that brown part up top of that map, brown? Those are high mountains, okay? And the wind that comes off of those mountains of Anatolia, wow, it has a name. It's called Euraquilo in Latin, or it's called Northeastern in your English language Bible, okay? And everybody knows about them. All the sailors about them, I can assure you, because when those things come up, they will blow you from north east to southwest at a speed of about 100 miles per hour. And I'll remind you that they did have sails in ancient times, and when they did have human power, slaves and galleys, still you were at the mercy of the winds and sails and the steering wheel of a boat. Normally the two things on the back that maneuver the direction of the ship together with the sails. So must have been good sailing, because Luke just describes it in the second flat. Must have been a good time of the year. And they sailed from Paphos up to, look, we're up in the upper left of the map, Perga and Pamphylia. Do you see there? Now those, Perga is where is mentioned here. So on the way in to the regions of what I'll call Asia Minor back then. Today we call it Turkey, country of Turkey, coast of Turkey, southern Turkey. They dock and go to the small city of Perga. There's no mention of evangelism there. Once again, I suggest to you that Paul has a methodology, okay? I'm reading the text of Acts, okay? Paphos came to Perga and Pamphylia, period. Doesn't say they went evangelized, doesn't say they went into synagogue. It does simply say this: at Perga, there on the coast, John left them, returned back to Jerusalem. Hello? What? John Mark left? Now, why would you go all the way up to the coast of there? You'd travel by sea and then turn around and catch a ship. Obviously, there were several coast huggers, I might call them. Because, by the way, to sail from Paphos to Perga, there had to be a major ship, mid-sized to grain ships. Then there were a lot of coast-hugging ships that would go along. It doesn't tell me what John Mark caught, but he went home. Why would he sail all the way there with them and then turn around and go home? So here's my suggestion. What you know, probably in advance, is that we're going to find out in chapter 15 of Acts that Paul is very upset about what he calls the defection of this young man. He is really upset. I don't know how Barnabas feels about it. He's probably disappointed, but the word that Paul will use is much stronger. He abandoned us. John Mark abandon us. Now, why would the young man abandon? What did he see when he got to Perga? Now, look at where Perga is and look at all the brown around it. So I'm going to use an illustration that I hope is effective. Have you ever seen the movie? It's so delightful, Princess Bride. Yes, yes, you have? Wow, amazing. I found 4 people that have seen it. Wow. Well, when you get to Perga, you're staring at some mountains that are amazing to climb. Okay. What I'm going to ask John Mark when I get there is, did you look at those mountains and go, okay, why did we come here and where are we on earth are we going now? Okay. Why did Paul go there? Okay. So the Holy Spirit said, go. Barnabas said, let's go to my island. They've done that. They stopped at evangelizing Salamis and Paphos. Now, who said, let's go to the coast of Asia Minor? And by the way, when you get there, you're staring at not 1 mile of mountains, not just a couple of Rockies. You're staring at the Alps, okay? And you're going to have to cross the Alps 120 miles to get to the next big, large city. So please look at this map now. Look at where they're going to go. Look at Antioch of Syria. Do you see? Oh, excuse me, Antioch of Pisidia. Do you see it? That's 120 miles. Where's the nearest city? It ain't for 120 miles and across the Alps. Okay? So here is my suggestion, and only I'm not climbing those mountains. Why are we going there? I'm just conjecturing. I don't know. But he abandons them. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah. By the way, here's a picture. Look at this picture right here. Those are the mountains. You see them? You see snow? So Paul is in his 40s. How old is Barnabas, by the way? I'm thinking older, but these guys are in good shape. Okay, let's get that straight. And here's the question again. Now, why on earth are you going from Perga and there's no mention of us and you are heading across those mountains? Let me give you 2 possible reasons. Okay, one of them has to do with the gospel and his methodology, right? Where does Paul want to plant the gospel? Where? All major urban centers. By the way, Antioch is the largest Roman colony in the area, but it happens to be 120 miles across those mountains right there. And John Mark says, I ain't going there, or something like that. And John Mark goes home. That's the reality. Now, let me suggest another one. Do you remember that in Galatians, Paul mentions that he had a physical ailment? No, yes. In Galatians 1, when he writes to these people, I think he's writing to the Pisidians, he says, when I first came to you, I came to you because of an illness. An illness? What illness? Suggestions. Malaria, which was a real problem in the 1st century. And like today, when some have certain kinds of diseases, illnesses, you send them to Arizona, drier climate, or Florida, or whatever. It could be that the climate of this area was more conducive. But here's another option. We know that in Antioch of Pisidia, where they're going to head to now, there was made an ointment for the eyes. For the eyes. In the 1st century AD, they knew about glass and the ability for it to be like a magnifying lens. If you had start losing vision, cataracts, short-sighted, nearsighted, they knew about that. Okay, they knew that, but there were also medicinals, herb-made medicinals that were known to help out certain conditions of eye infections, eye problems. Now, why am I bringing up eyes? because in several of Paul's letters, which he will dictate to a professional scribe, he will say things like, I am signing this letter with my own writing. You can recognize it. Now, how would you recognize the letters of Paul? Because they were different? Because they were bigger? Because he had bad eyesight? You see the connection. Why did Paul want to go to Antioch? Reason number one, it's a Roman colony. It's a huge center. If you plant the gospel there, it'll go to that whole region, right? Reason number two, there's a medical reason. I don't know which one it is, but those are the two best possibilities we have. All I know is that I'm impressed. They must have had hiking boots, and Barnabas must have been in very good shape. And John Mark quit. And he said, I'm going home to mama. And Paul did not like it at all. He forgave him later. Please remember, at the end of his life, John Mark's going to be in Rome with Paul, and he's going to love him. But right now, in the year 47, Paul has a major disappointment, okay? So here we are. They enter the province of Galatia, as it's called, beginning in verse, as we said, verse 14. John then returned to Jerusalem. They went on from Perga and came to Antioch of Pisidia. Wow. Luke simply narrates not only that trip by sea, which took probably days, if not weeks to travel, but also those mountains, 120 miles, that he just narrates in just half a verse. He just whoosh, like they had helicopters or something. There they go. No need to tell you how hard these journeys were, but they were. That's the point. They goes at great lengths. Now, did Paul come here because of malaria, because he needed an eye salve? Galatians 4:13 is the chapter and verse you're going to find. First came to you because that can't be the only reason. It must be also because that is the nearest large urban center where Paul is going to continue his methodology. Okay, and I'm any comments or questions that you have here? All right, so I'm reading in verse 14 of Acts chapter 13. On a Sabbath day, they went into the synagogue and sat down. After the reading from the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent a message to them saying, brothers, if you have any word of encouragement for the people, say it. So Paul stood up and motioning with his hand said. So in Antioch of Pisidia, and by the way, Josephus, the historian, confirms this, there was a large Jewish community, enough to have 10 that had their bar mitzvah, and a large Jewish community. And Paul uses methodology, goes there, he gets the microphone, he gets to preach. And the rest of chapter 13, I will not take time to read it, but if you wanted to read it, it would be this. Paul has a standard lesson that he gives in every synagogue that he goes to. In every synagogue that he goes to, he gives them a history lesson. Kind of like, Stephen. Stephen gave a history lesson to the rabbis, to the Pharisees and Sadducees in Jerusalem. He gave a history lesson to the history professors because here's the point. What are you going to tell the Jews when you get there? They're waiting for the Messiah. That's your message. But you have to start back and say, look, you know the prophets. You know how David announced it. You know that we've been waiting for centuries for God's plan to save his people, Israel. Okay? And then you come to the key moment, where you say, I know the Messiah. He came. Our leaders rejected him. What you will find in the sermon that Luke narrates in summary, that Paul gives in Antioch of Pisidia, is a standard sermon that Paul will give in every synagogue. He tells them the rest of the story that they don't know. He tells the Jews the rest of the story. Kind of like, did y'all ever listen to Paul Harvey? Do you know who he was? He used to have a wonderful segment called on radio, The Rest of the Story, stuff you don't know. And it was always intriguing to me. When I was a young teacher in Indianapolis, I know the secretary at lunch always had Paul Harvey on. And in that brief moment, he told you about somebody, didn't tell you their name, and then he told you something about them you didn't know, then he tell you the name at the end. Okay, here's Paul's methodology. I'm going to tell you a story that you know. Then I'm going to tell you the rest of the story, that the Messiah has come, and his name, he was a carpenter, a construction guy from Nazareth, and your leaders rejected him. I'm here to tell you that he came. And it's exciting, it's exciting every time. Now, it's not exciting when they say stuff like, "What, Nazareth? What good can come from Nazareth?" They didn't expect it to come from Nazareth, and yet the prophet said it would. Bethlehem, manger, despised, rejected, all the things that the prophets said, and they should know. Die on a cross like a common crucified criminal. You know that when Paul says your own leaders rejected him and put him on a cross, they say, well, why did they do that? Why didn't they recognize him? I mean, the Pharisees are the most trained theologians we have. Why didn't they recognize the Messiah? Why? And so you can retrace Matthew 23, 24, 25, when Jesus spars with the Pharisees over the fact that they're waiting for the Messiah, and he's standing right there, and they, don't see him. And so does the high priest and, the Sadducees as well. So there you go. But anyway, we're not going to read that sermon, but Acts 13 is a summary of the standard sermon that Paul gives in every synagogue that he'll give for the next 30 years, as long as you go in the synagogue. Okay. Any comments or questions that you have? Because again, all the rest of chapter 13 is that. And I'm going to come to 42, chapter 13, verse 42. If you will skip over to there to the after Paul's speech. Okay. By the way, let me read you the end. I'll always have they don't have an invitation song in the sermons. That's a Southern American thing, but they do have, and that's okay. I wouldn't make fun of it, but he does have a come to Jesus moment. Okay. If you want to speak of it that way, look at verse 42. Beware, therefore, lest what is said by the prophets should come about. He says, now you know. Now I've told you the truth. The Messiah has come. Watch out. The prophets warned about your reaction now that you know the truth. He quotes from a prophet, look, you scoffers, be astounded and perish. I am doing a work in our days, a work that you will not believe, even if one tells you. So even the prophets said they won't believe, and even when you tell them, even when you do miracles, they won't believe you. Many of them saw the miracles of Jesus over and over again and still didn't believe that he was the one. Look at verse 42. So the preaching of Paul in the synagogue in Antioch of Pisidia is over. As they went out, verse 42, the people begged them these things might be told them the next Sabbath. Come back the next Sabbath. And after the meeting of the synagogue broke up, many Jews, and watch out, Luke tells you even the composition of some of the peoples that were attracted. I'm not surprised. Devout converts to Judaism. There it is right there, Paulo. You see it? Sitting on the back pews of the synagogue are converts to Judaism. And those are ones that Paul is targeting right there. But he also wants his fellow brothers, Jewish, to believe too. Okay? They followed Paul and Barnabas, the conversations. Let me imagine, they went to the bar and had a cappuccino together. What do you think, Paulo? A great place to evangelize. Sounds good. Who, as they spoke to them, urged them to continue in the grace of God. Paul and Barnabas encouraged them, continued to ask these questions. We're going to stick around a few more days. We'll come back next Sabbath. However, look at the turn. One of the most disappointing things, but not surprising to Paul. The next Sabbath, almost the whole city gathered. Okay, I already told you synagogue can only hold 100, 150. The crowd is so big that it's a threat to the Jewish leadership. They don't want everybody to come to church. They don't want that. They're exclusivist. They don't want that. But when the Jews saw the crowds, they were filled with jealousy. That's that same motivation that Pilate saw in the high priest when Jesus was brought before him. He knew that they were wanting him dead because they were jealous. Jealousy is a horrendous motivator of human action. They were filled with jealousy, began to contradict, so they don't let him talk anymore. Next Sabbath is a horrendous experience. Goes downhill from word go. And Paul and Barnabas spoke out boldly. That doesn't stop Paul and Barnabas. They speak up over the noise, the din, the crowd, the shouts, the whistles, the saying it was necessary that the word of God be spoken first to you. So look, Paulo, here again, it says the gospel came to the Jews first, right? Just like Jesus and the apostles brought it to the Jews. However, since you, the privileged, the children of Israel, the one to whom the prophets spoke for centuries, are turning it down again, we're going to go to, and here it is. Since you thrust it aside and judge yourself unworthy of eternal life, behold, we are turning to the Gentiles. For so the Lord has commanded us, saying, I have made a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth. So when the pagans that were there in that large mob crowd outside the synagogue heard this, they began rejoicing. Instead of being second-class citizens in the synagogue, they were being told by Paul and Barnabas, you're first-class citizens in the kingdom of heaven. You can be, if you wish. And the word of the Lord was spreading. By the way, this verse 49 is one of typical words, summary verses of Luke, where he says, and things went well for a while. The gospel was spread in Antioch of Pisidia. But there's always the turn, tragically. Verse 50. But the Jews incited devout women of high standing. Notice how Luke targets. There are some people, it's not gender, it's about there's certain people that are easily turned by false accusations, maligning. In this case, in Antioch Pisidia, was women of high standing and leading men of the city. They were spurred on by the angry Jewish leaders, stirred up the persecution against Paul and Barnabas, drove them out of their districts. So drove them out of Pisidia, okay? And I love verse 51. Paul and Barnabas turn around as they are being driven out by in Antioch of Syria, Antioch of Pisidia. And they take their shoes off. They shook off the dust from their feet against them and went to Iconium. Okay. Now, this is not a metaphor. It's a real action. Still in the Middle East today. I don't know if you saw the images when Baghdad fell. Were you watching television when Baghdad fell and the statues of Saddam Hussein were toppled? One of the massive statues of Saddam Hussein was toppled by Iraqis themselves. And the images on the TV were of Iraqis, Middle Easterners, taking their shoes and hitting the statue with their shoes. Here is still a Middle Eastern, you say, act. You leave behind this is not offensive. Paul and Barnabas are not being offensive. They're saying, you choose. You are rejecting the gospel. You're rejecting the truth. You can keep your dust. You can keep your dust. They shake the dust off their shoes. It's a very dramatic, not offensive, but it's a very dramatic action. Away with your blood is on your hands now. We have brought you. We came 120 miles across mountains to deliver you the message of God, to the risk of our own health. And you have turned us down. So they put the blame on the Jewish leadership, the synagogue there. And by the way, this is a very dramatic action. And they move on. And this is where I pick up verse Iconium, verse 51. And they went on to Iconium from the city of Antioch of Pisidia. Okay. There's where Pisidian Antioch is. Let me show you the place where Paul and Barnabas were in the year 48. That's probably the winter or spring of the year 48, okay? This is the mountains that I was telling about. These are ruins or archaeological remains in the city of Antioch of Pisidia. It was a major Roman colony. Um, Paul will travel nearly every city he goes to is a Roman colony, except for maybe one. Is that right? He travels mostly on cities that are major urban centers. Antioch of Pisidia is one of them, but it took him a long way to get there. Here's the main street of Antioch. Archaeological excavations today. This is the Romans had built it the way they always did. The Greeks came up with a grid pattern, and then the Romans organized their military camps that way with a main road going north-south and one going east-west. And this is a typical Roman road with large stones. Most of them were built by legionnaires themselves. And on the sides would be shops and columnated, covered shops, covered areas where you could take refuge from the sun or the rain. So these are excavations of Antioch of Pisidia. And when Paul and Barnabas leave there in 48, they leave behind a community of faith and some very angry Jewish leadership. And that's going to be what's going to pursue them in the cities they're going on to in the first missionary journey. Here are other images of the ruins of Antioch of Pisidia that have been excavated today. Some of the walls are from the Hellenistic period, so 3rd century before Christ, but most of them are from the 1st century AD, time of Paul. This is one of the major temples. I believe this is to, I'm trying to remember what god, but it's excavated out of the stone. It's the foundations or bases of a major pagan temple that was there. Just to remind you that Paul and Barnabas are preaching in a very hostile environment, not only because of the Jewish reaction to the gospel, but also because, of course, pagan temples are there. Here's in the ruins of Antioch of Pisidia that it was Apollo. This is a temple to Apollo, but I could be wrong. A major theater with theatrical productions and concert theater and political events. This is a watering station. They had running water, even in the middle of their major Roman roads here. Here again, in one of the city gates. So there was a major arches here that led into the city of Antioch. And there you go. Look, please, where Antioch is. And now go to Iconium. We're going to do Iconium and stop there. And I have gone slow tonight. I'm going to have to go faster next time. I assume this is well-known territory to you, but please pick up with me in verse, where is it? 48. When the Gentiles heard this, they began rejoicing, glorifying, and when the word of the Lord spread, then verse 51, they shook off the dust from their feet, and Antioch against them went to Iconium. There's Iconium. It's about 70 miles from Antioch to Iconium, okay? Southeast. That's the next largest urban center in this region. Did Paul have a plan to go there? I don't think so. I think that the plan to go to Antioch was there, but then when they got run out of Antioch, then they had to go somewhere. So they went to the next largest urban center in this area, Iconium. And what it says is they went to Iconium, and the disciples were filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit. Now in Iconium, they entered together into the Jewish synagogue, again, a large community, Acts chapter 14. They spoke in such a way that a great number of both Jews and Greeks believed. Luke doesn't bother to tell you again the speech that Paul gave, because you already had it, a similar one in Acts chapter 13, and he preached in the synagogue in Iconium. By the way, this is a remains from Iconium. You see in the inscription that we have here, archaeological remains, Iconia, there, highlighted there. This is the modern day city of Iconia, or Konya as it's called in the Turkish. It's a major center for the making of textiles, cotton, things like that. It's a major Turkish center, but that's where a major city was back in the time of Paul. There's beautiful lakes nearby, okay? And that's one of the reasons why the textile industry is still, to this day, very prominent in this area of central Turkey, south central Turkey, which is where Iconium is. In the larger region of, can you see it, Pisidia, okay? Pisidia. So here's what Luke tells us. They remained in Iconia for a long time, speaking boldly for the Lord, who bore witness to the word of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands. Here again, please make note. From time to time, Paul does miracles, but not always. You take note when the text tells you, and he did miracles here. Okay? I don't know if Barnabas had a charismatic gift. He possibly or probably did, but he would have one. The Apostle Paul had all of the charismatic gifts, like all the apostles, but he didn't exercise them all the time, and he used them sporadically. In Iconium, he used them, okay? And here's the reaction in Iconium. The people of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews, some sided with the apostles. Here again, the word apostle is used for both Paul and Barnabas. Let me make note again. Barnabas is an apostle in the one of the senses of the word, which means sent out on a mission. Barnabas and Paul were sent out by the church in Antioch on a missionary journey. That's the way in which the word apostle is being used here. Okay? Paul is both an apostle in the limited sense and in the generic sense. He's both. So that term applies to both. There are people that say Barnabas was an apostle as well. Yes and no. He was in the sense of apostello in Greek means sent out on a mission. Apostello is also used in a limited sense, and no, Barnabas is not the Apostle Paul. Paul was given a commission of apostleship to the Gentiles on the road to Damascus. Okay, and there you are. So let me see if there's anything else. Look at verse 5. When an attempt was made by both the Gentiles and Jews with their rulers to mistreat them and to stone them, things turned sour very quickly in Iconium. They learned of it. They have to flee again and fled to Lystra. Would you look at where Lystra is? Lystra is only 20 miles southwest. Do you see it? They fled 20 miles southwest to Lystra. So again, I say, I don't think they intended to go to Lystra, but they have to, because things get really dangerous in Iconium because of a reaction by the part of some. They came to Lystra and to Derbe. Derbe is about another 20, 30 miles, and it's southeast again of Lystra. Cities that are, watch out, the text of Acts tells you, in Lycaonia. Now, in the map that you're looking at, Lycaonia is a part of, is a smaller region of Pisidia. And here's the thing, in the region of Lycaonia, you're talking Podunksville, you're talking Styx, you're talking the end of civilization, okay? And they may have spoken some Greek, they probably did, because Alexander the Great conquered the area 3 centuries before, but they speak mostly Lycaonian because you're out in the country on the Styx. Derbe is a horse changing station in the Wild West, kind of to make a comparison, okay? It's not much more than that. And by the way, do you see anything between Derbe and Paul's hometown of Tarsus? Do you see anything? No, there's nothing. It's no man's land, okay? No urban centers. Derbe is Podunksville. Lystra is small. Iconium's medium size. Antioch is large. They're gone as far as civilization or a horse will take them, okay? And by the way, this is Lystra. In the inscriptions, archaeologically speaking, we do have remnants of it. And by the way, that's all that's left of Lystra today. There's nothing. It's a hill. It's a tell. And that's the hometown of a young man that will be extremely dear to Paul for the next 15 years. What's his name? Timothy. That's where Timothy is. Paul's going to encounter a young man that he will pick up on a next missionary journey. It's the second. When he comes back through here, he will pick up Timothy in Lystra. By the way, that's Derby today. There's nothing. That's as big of a house as you'll find in Derby today, okay? It's a mud brick house. Probably there was not much more than that back then too. But communities of faith were established even here in the first missionary journey of Paul in the year 48. And then he had to return. We're going to stop here for the night. It's 8:49. You've been so kind. We're going to finish the first missionary journey and go into the second. So please go ahead and read N.T. Wright in the second missionary journey, which is much longer, of course. And we'll take you all the way to Athens. So please read in N.T. Wright as far as Athens, at least. We will try to go there next time. And we will climb Mars Hill. And I'm excited to go there. Mark's been there.
With you.
Tingles every time I go back there.
Yeah.
So Parker, Paolo, have you been there to Mars Hill?
No.
All right, Miss Sandy, I just got an invitation to go speak on the Mediterranean lectureships in June in Greece again. And my answer is yes. Any excuse to go back to where Paul stood in the midst of 100 Greek philosophers and spoke the truth and prayed that somebody would listen. Absolutely yes. Right now, he's in a mud hut in Derby. This is where we're going to leave him in Acts chapter, at the end of Acts chapter of, middle of 14. And we're going to pick up and finish off the first missionary journey next time. And do you have any comments or questions or things you need to know? If this material is already well known to you and you'd like to go faster, move on. Just say the word, okay? But I take refuge in it every time I get to do this trip, make this journey, read it again, tell the story. What I hope you will do with this is tell the story. Tell it to teenagers, tell it to children, and make it come alive for some adults that think they know the book of Acts, think they know Paul, think they know the amazing story of the exponential development of Christianity in the first century AD, but they've lost the passion. Bring the passion to your storytelling. Tell it again. And let's be grateful that we have these details and be thankful for the travels and the life of Paul. So till I see you next time, God bless. Have a great week. And make